Rats are on parade, another mad charade. What you gonna do? The hounds are on the chase, everything's erased. What you gonna do? I need some room to breathe. You can stay asleep if you wanted to. They say that nothing's free. You can run with me if you wanted to. This is the Community Solutions Podcast. Jason Bradley, Andrew Richter, tearing it up, bringing the pain. Thank you all for joining us. How you doing, Andrew?
I couldn't be better.
That's good.
Now, as always, every week you stump me. I think I'm like 2 for 80 or something like that.
Something like that. We're pretty close to 80.
I did name 3 Billy Joel songs though that one week.
That was good.
Can't remember them, but I know I did. So who was that? Was that what, Motley Crue?
No, Foo Fighters.
Foo Fighters. I've heard of them.
Yeah. The name of the song is Run. Since we have a candidate who's running for office this week, I thought that was.
You always make that connection, and I never get it till like a month later. So.
Well, that's all right as long as you come around.
I did have an eventful day, though. Not only did I see a good Dr. Phil today, but I saw somebody. Boy. It's not every day you see somebody get killed either.
No,
I saw somebody get killed today.
You did?
I did. He was drinking a glass of milk. It was a Polish guy. And you know how I can tell?
How?
Because the cow fell on him.
Oh boy!
Oh come on, that's a good one. Was that culturally insensitive that I just said?
That's fine.
Oh, okay.
That's fine for this program. I don't kowtow to...
Oh, gee whiz. That's terrible.
That was terrible.
I mean, I get booed everywhere, but that'll get you the cane or whatever that yanks you off stage.
Better that cane than like the kind in Singapore where they
yes, definitely. I don't know
probably
about that.
Probably get about 35 lashes for that one.
I never seen that, but I read history.
Oh. So we've got some things happening around. We got David Seffrin who's coming on, who's running in the city of Crystal. Mm-hmm. He's going to tell us all about the wonderful things he's doing. But before we do that, we got a couple of things to handle here.
We do. And I'll say this. It's going to be a great interview with David. I had the pleasure of serving with him on the Crystal City Code Task Force. And I know he's got a lot to say, running on some good stuff down in Ward 1. It'll be a great interview.
Good. I'm looking forward to that. Down in Eden Prairie, this is just maybe a little bit of a follow-up. We did something on the podcast. Oh, I don't know how many episodes ago it was. I could figure out what episode
sometime in the spring, I think.
But they wanted to put in a moratorium on opening any new firearms stores in the city. There was, during the first reading, only one member stood up. We had recounted what happened during that meeting. And the mayor of that city, Nancy Tyra-Lukens, decided that it was up to cities to do something. She had been to, I think it was the U.S. Mayor's Conference, and they had people from Parkland come in and say, cities have to do something because the federal government's not doing it.
Right. It's the old, we can't get it what we want from the state government or the federal government, so we're going to, go where we can to get our views pushed.
Exactly. So, she is not running again for mayor, so it's an open seat right now, and there are 2 of the council people from opposing sides of that issue that are running for mayor. So you have a really clear choice when it comes to what you believe in Eden Prairie. You have Brad Aho, who is running for mayor. He's the guy that stood up and said, I don't think this is right. I don't want to do it this way. They had tried to put the first and second readings of this ordinance together into one vote, which is crazy.
Yeah.
But
breaking their city code and their charter if they're a charter city, I'm sure.
Right. So terrible. But yeah, Brad stood up and he said that, it's not a good idea. And he was outvoted 4-1. So one of the other 4 members is Ron Case, who is the guy that in that podcast we said he stood up and he was talking about how when when people who are pro-gun see a big sign saying guns for sale, they have a visceral reaction. They are really excited to see that there are guns for sale. And on the other end, you have people who are scared of guns. And when they see a big guns for sale sign, they're really scared, and they have a visceral reaction.
He said it was like a billboard or something, right?
Just the big signs that say, yeah.
Most people I see driving in the passenger seat have their head down on their iPhone, whatever, or their gizmos or gadgets.
It's true.
I don't see too many visceral reactions going by.
No. If it is, people are shaking their fist at their phone and not keeping either hand on the wheel. It's terrible. We need to drive safe out there, folks. But so you have a clear case of
hey, that's a good pun.
Yes, I mean, no. In that case, you have a bad case, and you have a good aho. You need to figure out.
For once, you got worse jokes than me on a podcast.
Yeah, I don't know what my deal is. My stand-up routine is rusty at best, I guess. So, anyways, you have a clear decision to make, Eden Prairie. Either you want to stick with the Second Amendment, you got a guy in Braddock who will do that, or you have Ron Case, who, I don't know, maybe his slogan should be, just in case you don't like freedom, vote for me.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're seeing this everywhere. Saw this in Golden Valley, being a very divided council on this issue as well. We're seeing other issues like this being taken up in whatever city, be it St. Louis Park, be it the Tobacco 21 issue, where we've talked about a million times about cities going in and passing the strangest laws. I mean, you can't purchase tobacco, but you can use it.
Right.
Which is as weird of something as you could possibly make it. So, Eden Prairie, I don't know what's going on down there. I've been, it's a strange set of circumstances when you get issues like this in a city council.
Yes, it is. Because there's really not much that they can do.
Well,
legally,
I mean, but I mean, how many times have we seen a government just sort of do what they want and challenge somebody to challenge them? I mean, ultimately, voting them out and re-changing things are the only way you're really going to fix this. You can't rely on the courts because courts are unpredictable, and they should be predictable. I mean, they should be interpreting law, not making it, but you have advocates wearing robes. I mean, ultimately, their personal views, they don't know the difference between the law and a personal opinion.
Right.
So,
well, and as long as we continue to look at case law versus look at the Constitution, we're going to have that problem. So,
well, and I'll tell you what, I mean, you see something, I don't know, I can't pinpoint when this started, this judiciary becoming the final decision makers on law or not. Not the way the founders envisioned,
right,
but what it's become.
Yes.
Where it's become that even, it's something doesn't happen, the attorney general turns around and tries to sue everybody. And it's become just sort of a football where, we talked about not getting something through at the state or federal level. Mm-hmm. Now people are seeking it at the courts. I mean, we saw this with, legalizing gay marriage is a good example of where 30 or 40 states passed constitutional amendments. The Supreme Court walks in and just invalidates them all. I mean, whatever you think of that issue, I'm not debating that. What I'm saying is, how can states write something into their constitution, have referendums, have the issue debated, write something in, and the Supreme Court can just, 9 people can walk in and just say, nope. Yep. I mean, pretty scary when you think about it like that. So,
yeah, that's true. So,
anyhow, going off the subject here, you got something from there's a dairy farm trying to expand. We got our friends at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency trying to stop it.
Hey, they also run Minnesota Green Step Cities, don't they?
Another one of our favorites.
Oh, criminy. So yeah, Lake City, Minnesota. It's down on Lake Pepin, just ways south of Red Wing. There is and it's not actually in the city. I mean, having a dairy farm in the city probably wouldn't be a good idea.
Oh, Wabasha County, yeah.
But it's down in Wabasha County, and it's in a township that is West Albany Township. It says it's about 8 miles south of Lake City, and they want to expand their current operation. This dairy farm has about 600 mature dairy cows, 141 dairy heifers, 300 dairy calves, for a total of almost 1,000 animal units. So they want to about triple the size of this. They want to. There are farms that are requesting. I think, 3 other farms that are requesting to have the manure from these new animals that would be coming on to spread on their farms, so it wouldn't all just be piling up at this farm, right? But of course, our friends over at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency are worried about the water. They're worried about the well water. They're worried about, I suppose, the water at Lake Pepin or running out into the St. Croix. I don't know.
Now, what is it about the water? If they're using well water, if they're on their own well, privately,
right?
What? I don't see what the issue would be. They have their own private well.
Yeah.
What's the issue with the water elsewhere?
Part of it is they think that they're going to have to drill more wells to be able to give water to these 2,000 more cows.
Well, fine.
Right. But they're all worried about it taking up too much of the groundwater or whatever. And, what happens when this well goes dry? They
have cactuses in their aquifers or something?
I don't know.
I like this guy here, George Meyer. He says something kind of interesting, that the expansion will jeopardize his health and his water supply. His health?
Wow. Well, I mean, there is a concern about the way that the manure is going to smell in the area. I mean, you're tripling the size of the farm. And I guess if the people in that area are concerned about that, I mean, you get into a freedom issue. You're free to do what you want until it affects the freedom of someone else.
Sure.
But again, this is government controlling this. This isn't. You're living in a farming community with dairy farms. It's going to stink. I mean,
who's the EAW? That's what I want to know.
The EAW.
All these acronyms we get, and I don't know who the heck it is.
Right. Well, yeah, it doesn't really say.
Doesn't matter.
Really?
Yeah, we'll put it on the blog later and we'll find out. But I mean, who is? I guess my question is, if this is an issue for planning or for the township or for the nearest city or whoever has jurisdiction over this, where does the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency come in with this?
Well, because of the air quality, right, with the stink, because...
Well, it's already a farm, so...
Right.
I mean, presumably there's already,
Right. Well, and that's the thing. So... What they did is they drew up this EAW. It's like it's a tool.
You know what it is now?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do my homework. Sometimes
I got an
on
F
the
in
air,
that.
But no. So it's what they use to gather the information that they use to make their assessment.
Okay.
So They say, it's not an approval, it's not an endorsement or a rejection of a project. It just lets them put together the various potential impacts.
So then it's up to whoever's in charge to weigh those things, and that's not...
It shouldn't be the government. I mean...
But it's not the Pollution Control Agency's jurisdiction.
No, I think that if... there's a problem in the township and the people in the township don't want to have that that farm expand to that level, that's something they need to take up with their township board.
It's not even mentioned in this.
No, the township board doesn't seem to be a problem. It's the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. But because it affects the air quality, supposedly with the smell, and because it supposedly affects water, they can stick their nose in there.
Even well water that's not
It comes out of the ground. It's groundwater.
It's funny. I thought the land that you own is the land that you own.
Well, so much for that thinking.
Oh, well, I tell you what, I mean, it's a tough issue. I mean, I come from a line of family farmers on my mother's side, and, large farms have expanded, and in some ways the family farm is kind of a way of the past, but that happens can't make a living on an assembly line either anymore. So,
farming is tough. I come from a line of farmers as well. On my dad's side down in Kentucky, there were a bunch of tobacco farmers, and so you can imagine what a hard time they're having right now.
Yeah, no kidding.
With all of that. So it is what it is. I don't know, Andrew. I think that when we have John Ulrich on the show here in a podcast or two, maybe we'll have to talk to him about this scenario.
Well, he'd know the answer if anybody would.
So you guys will have to look out for that show.
Exciting soil and water stuff coming up.
Absolutely.
We talk about it on this program, folks, no matter how boring.
We make it exciting.
We do.
It's not boring when it comes out of our mouths. I
find it exciting.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't know if I'm alone on that, but you fall asleep half the time, so I'm not sure if you're excited or not.
What? I don't know.
Joking.
I
folks.
think that people are interested if it means that they're going to have to pay more money in taxes.
Or the unintended consequences too that we bring up too of government action at any level. So,
right.
Yep, always happens.
Oh, fun. All right. Well, that was good stuff. We are going to have David Seffrin coming up right after this break, so don't you go anywhere because this is going to be good.
Hey, this is Jason Bradley from the Community Solutions Podcast. I just want to take a moment and talk to you because we are neck deep in election season and people are getting their campaigns into full swing. And we wouldn't have it any other way than having you out there in the community meeting your neighbors and growing Team 20K. You know what, though? Some of you out there I know could use a little extra bump, whether that's some strategy, whether that's learning how to read a comprehensive annual financial report, whether that is understanding your city's comprehensive plan. We're here for you. So get a hold of us, and we would love to sit down for a consulting session with you. Nobody else in Minnesota does this at the local level. All you got to do is reach out to us at commsolutionsmn@gmail.com. That is commsolutionsmn@gmail.com, and we will sure make your campaign competitive. All right, enough of my yapping, and back to the show.
And welcome back. We are here with David Seffrin. His website, seffrinforcrystal.com. He is running down in Ward 1 to fill the open seat vacated by Elizabeth Dahl. And welcome to the program, David.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Andrew, for having me.
Absolutely, our pleasure. Well, why don't we just start off? Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background. Let us get to know you a little bit.
Well, as you said, I'm David Seffrin. I've lived in Crystal for 29 years in the Bassett Creek neighborhood. I'm running for the Ward 1 seat. Ward 1 is the southern quarter of Crystal, roughly 34th Street south to Medicine Lake Road, and from Highway 100 all the way over to Boone on the west side. I've been working in information technology my entire life. Married, a couple kids in Crystal there. Suki the Wonder Dog. And I have started thinking about running for office maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And when the seat became open, some neighbors and friends said, you should go for it. So here I am, going for it.
Well, fantastic.
Yeah, kind of the opposite of me. I had to convince people that I should go for it. He has other people.
Yeah, I used to get that too up in my neighborhood, and I'm like, I think I'm better off trying to find people to run than I am running. I don't know. I don't like personally the thought of door knocking. And
Jay, let me tell you something. It's if everybody, and I'm sure David would agree on this, I wish everybody could spend a summer or a fall knocking on doors and talking to people.
Yeah.
It's honestly is an experience. I mean, the positives by far outweigh the negatives, and I think that it's a rewarding thing to do.
I think it is, and like when we have our events, I love meeting people and talking to them and hearing what's
but you
going
want the
on.
people to come to you. You don't want to go to the people.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Once you get over those first few, I think you'll relax a little bit and get down what you want to say.
It took me a while to get into the swing of things with the door knocking.
Yeah.
But you are right. The things that I've learned from the residents are pretty interesting, and I've talked to some really nice people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great experience as far as I'm concerned. Even for me, it was good.
Yeah.
And you know how technical and uninteresting I can be sometimes. So
I don't know about that. I keep you around. That's
true.
It's a pretty ringing endorsement.
Well, like we say, I mean, the show wouldn't work if one of us wasn't here.
right.
It just wouldn't. I would never go on and do a show if you weren't here. If you moved to Antarctica, I'd quit doing this.
Wow.
Because I mean, we have to have it. You're the anchor, and I'm the star. We have to have those two defined things, or it's just not right. I don't play off of anybody like I play off of you, so it would never work.
Right.
I could do a sports show or something with somebody else, but I couldn't do this. With
No,
anybody. So,
probably not.
yep.
Probably not. You need me to keep you grounded. All right.
much.
So, David, Crystal is a remarkably different city than it was 8 years ago, and you've been here long enough. Why don't you tell us, just from a resident's point of view, I mean, let's take running for office out of this. What do you feel about the city from the Renee Bowman years and the transition into like the Jim Adams years? And for those of you listening, those are the current mayor is Jim Adams. The last mayor was Renee Bowman. And I don't mean for you to pick apart the jobs they did, but just how is the city different?
Well, mainly I like the fact that the council seems to be into more of a long-term attitude now with planning and the budget. They're working on a 2-year budget cycle now. They just the first 2-year budget just came out. They're looking at longer-term capital investment. There's now a long-term parks plan that's been in place for maintaining and renovating the parks over, I think it's a 20-year period, a very long-term plan, but it's a plan that didn't exist before. I think that the taxes are pretty well in check. I think the spending is under control. I'm pretty pleased with the fiscal responsibility that the current council is exercising, and I hope to continue that. In fact, that's one of the 3 things that I want to focus on is the fiscal responsibility issue.
Now, on that issue, on your website, and you can go again to saffronforcrystal.com. There is an issues page where David goes into a lot of detail. I'm not going to sit here and read it. You folks, our audience is smart enough. You can do that yourself. One thing you talk about on here is things like assessments. And I know you were when the streets were reconstructed before, you were an early part of the phase. There's a mill and overlay phase going on. The previous councils had assessed for that. The current council is trying to get away from that added tax with interest on it. Why don't you get into like sort of your thinking on that issue about the long-term planning?
I'll relate specifically what we were told. I was in the phase 2 part of the street project. We were told that we would never have to pay for street maintenance again because we were assessed mightily. The people who were at the end of the project, of the phases, they paid a lot more than people at the beginning did. And then I came to learn that some mill and overlay took place and the residents were assessed. And it demonstrates that when the city council or the city engineer makes a quote-unquote promise, that you should probably take that with a grain of salt, because it's not a contract, it is a spoken promise. And if the city decides to assess, there's not much you can do about it. You cannot contest it or take it to court, and so you're just kind of stuck paying for it.
So, and that's a good point, because I think that you hear a lot about, oh, don't worry, you get there, I think a lot, and then all of a sudden 20 years later, there's a completely different council, completely different staff or whatever. They want to do it their way. And like you said, there's not much you can show up. But by the time you show up, the plans are already in place and it's pretty much going to go forward.
I mean, when you pay your annual tax bill to the city, it should cover something. Clearly, it covers, your public safety, fire and police. It covers, all the administration expenses of the city and so forth. But a little bit should be put away for the future for things that we know are going to happen. We know that water mains are going to break. We know that sewers are going to have to be fixed. We know that streets are going to have to be maintained and parks. And so I am in favor of a healthy dose of rainy day budgeting, so that through fund accounting, that you pay everybody pays a little bit more now, but later on when these expenses crop up, because they are going to happen, the money is there to pay for them, and you do not have to assess.
Well, and we always make a case about hidden taxes, and general assessments, bonding, TIF districts, fees, and for permits, franchise fees. All of these things are often things that we don't expect or we don't see because they're not on our property tax statements. And so we don't always know that we're being taxed in that way, or we don't equate it to being taxed in that way. Now, sometimes there may be a reason to use one of those versus putting it onto the property tax statements. But I think as a general rule of thumb, cities should be living off of, living within their means. They should be, residents should be able to see what they're paying and where it's going.
Yeah, it's not so simple. If you go to the city budget, a budget should be 250 pages. It's not here's what's coming in, there's what's going out.
Right.
I wish it was that simple, but it really isn't.
I mean, I have a classic example of what I would consider, poor decision making in terms of, benefit or cost versus benefit. And it was many years ago in the city of in Robbinsdale School District, they were going to do a assessment or a referendum for technology. And they were going to basically have a 10-year bonding or 10-year referendum to cover buying new computers and phone systems for the schools. Well, anybody who has a computer knows it will last approximately 3 years, 4 years, and you'd be paying for that for 10 years. So I wrote a letter to the editor in the Sun Post, and it was published. And I had a number of people who were shaking their head and agreeing with me on that one, because you cannot finance computers and technology for 10 years because the technology is always marching forward, and you're going to be paying for it much longer than its useful life.
Yeah, just think about computers and phones 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
Right.
And that's your answer right there to something like that. It's funny watching like a movie in the 90s or something and seeing like somebody with a cordless phone, and that was the coolest thing or something.
Right, or in the 80s, it had to be a car phone with a cord, right?
Yeah.
A brick.
Yeah.
The brick
But
phone.
like you're watching a sitcom and the parents don't know where their kids are. It's like, why don't they just text them? Oh, wait, they couldn't do that then. It's, technology is the one thing that no one can put the brakes on.
But not even going back that far. I think about like when 24 was on, I used to watch that show a lot, and it was so weird because it was kind of in this transition between like flip phones and the smartphones, and it was weird to go back and see some of that. It's like, well, why doesn't he just? Oh yeah, it's a flip phone.
Right. Another show I've never watched.
You're missing out, or you did miss out.
I tell you what, there's not a trendy show ever that I have ever seen.
Well, you do watch Dr. Phil, so
well,
I guess
that's good stuff. I mean, that is good stuff there. I mean, the thing is, I mean, everybody, like my sister, my brother-in-law, watch every trendy show. From I don't even remember them. Bad Breaking or something, and I don't remember. But and I'm just sitting. They're all talking about it, and I have no idea what they're talking about. I'm sitting there watching Home Improvement reruns.
It's popular culture.
Yeah, I know. And so I got to get into that.
Get with it.
Oh, my word.
To me, pop culture is like Madonna or Whitney Houston. That's pop culture. I don't know any today. I know it's terrible.
Yeah, it kind of is. You mentioned like the water mains and stuff like that. Kind of on the same level and saving for the future. And I know that there's. You had mentioned off air that 2/3 of the city's sewer system is pretty old. What's your vision around that, and how do you feel?
So, yeah, I saw a map, and roughly 2/3 of the city sewer system is approaching end of life, 50-plus years old. And over the next decade, something is going to have to be done with that, and it will be a major capital infrastructure investment. So, I mean, my view on it is that, on a long-term investment, there is some level of bonding that would be warranted, but you have to look at the interest costs. You have to look at the long-term cost of a project. You can't just look at, it's going to cost, $5 million today. It could easily cost 10 or 15 millions. And we're in a increasing interest rate economy right now. So, on my website, I talk about watching any kind of capital project where bonding or debt would be used and putting a real sharp eye on that to ensure that the long-term costs do not eclipse the benefits.
Well, that's good, yeah. And I know we rail against bonding a ton on this show, but that's because it's misused, and so many people just want to bond for everything. Hey, we're building a bridge, let's bond. Hey, we're setting up a whatever, let's bond for it.
Well, and like both of us have said the reasoning behind it.
Right.
Why are you bonding? Well, that's what we did last time.
Yeah.
Okay. Why are you bonding? Well, that's what the finance person recommends.
Right.
Okay. Well, you're in charge of the finance person. I mean, you tell them, it's their job to bring scenarios to you. It's not the other way around, and you're not supposed to rubber stamp whatever the finance person says. So there's always that. Look, I don't think a bond is an evil 4-letter word. It exists for a reason. Mm-hmm. But planning to bond a percent is one thing.
Yeah.
Not making any savings and then wanting to do something huge, like I don't just name a city. I try to think New Hope. That's where the fiscal management comes into play and the long-term thinking, David, that you're advocating here.
I'm a data analyst, and I get into the weeds on the details, and that's the kind of thing that I would dig into. And I mean, I've been in business my entire life. I've been responsible for P&L. I understand finance. And I think that a lot of times cities or elected representatives don't get into the weeds on that. And that's something that I will, though, because it's important to me. My taxes that I've paid in my lifetime are plenty high. And so, I mean, I would be watching the spending, watching the taxes, and especially on longer term projects that can be very expensive, and just making sure that the benefits do not, or the costs do not outweigh the benefits.
All right. Well, let's take another issue up to topic. You served with me on the City Code Task Force. We just had a blast.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, we had a blast going through the City Code and stuff I find interesting. And so I know I can say firsthand, and I can tell residents that David was a very, very active member of that. You're detail-oriented. I'm sorry.
Yes,
definitely better. It was needed and was demonstrated on that. I'm just kind of, I want to get your take, though, first on the experience on that. It was a long process to go through that. Unfortunately, with me moving, I didn't get to see that through. I wish I would have. But what can you share with I've talked about it on the air before, but what can you share about going through that and just your experience seeing that city code and what was in it, and maybe what you'd take further if becoming a council member?
Well, if memory serves, it was roughly 16 months that we were on there. And, I have to say that there was not just me, there was a dedicated group of people who were on that commission. And a lot of really thoughtful work went into reviewing the code. We had homework. And I think in the end, common sense prevailed. But what I discovered mainly was that you could see where the code was written many decades ago, and something may have happened somewhere in the country, and a new regulation or ordinance was passed because that could happen in Crystal, yet the other code remained. So it looked and parts of it didn't mesh, like stylistically. It looked like it was patched and band-aided over many years, and no one ever went in and reviewed. And so, interesting point that Troy Gilchrist, who is the city attorney, and the city outsources that to a firm, but that firm also represents other cities. Troy mentioned that other cities were paying attention to what we were doing in Crystal because their codes were also bloated and patched and band-aided over many years. And through the 16 months, we came up with hundreds of different suggestions. Troy and his firm went back and cobbled that all together and packaged it up into tidy little packages for the city council to review, and they've adopted many, many, many of our suggestions. And I think we ended that at the beginning or 17 or March of 17. They have been the city council has been taking that up month after month since then. In the last council meeting, I think they were working on chapter 10. There's like four or five chapters left, but it's been quite a process. But I think in the end, the code will be more user-friendly. I like to say that, if you're a resident and you want to pull a permit from the city, you shouldn't have to hire an attorney to interpret the code in order to go and get your permit. I'm not going to say we got 100% of it, so you talk about going forward. If we got half of it, it's that much better, 50% better than it was. It still is a lot of regulations, and I'm more of a smaller government guy. It just seems like people need to question why we have certain regulations and what is duplicative. Duplicative?
Yes.
Duplicitous? Duplicative?
Yeah. More than one.
We ran into things like you had to have, if you were a plumber, you had to have a city license, but you also had to have a county license. Their electrician might have to have a state license and a county license and a city license. It seems like if the state was reviewing and licensing an electrician, that should be good enough for the city. So, or the county or whatever. So that was... We talked about that quite a bit.
I remember that.
I know massage therapists as well. They had to have a state license and a city license. They had to pay for the police department to do an investigation on them. Plus,
there was a permit cost to running business from your home too.
Yeah.
So one of the things was that a lot of the regulations are just written out like in sentences and paragraphs. And so we took the stance that, graphs and charts and tables are far more understandable. So you talk about the licenses right now in the code, and I think this is in chapter 10. It lists the various licenses that you can apply for, specifically in regards to liquor, and then on the rows and then across the columns you have to get a background check, you have to get a bond, you have to get all these different requirements in a XY grid, so that it's very understandable to the average consumer or the average person who's going to use the code.
That's good. And I know a lot of code is driven by state statute, some of it by federal statute or federal law. And it's hard, and I think probably sometimes frustrating from the standpoint of wanting to reduce some of this stuff, change some of this stuff, and having to kind of butt up against some of the state statutes and so forth.
From a maintenance standpoint, if you took in your city code and there was something that you were adhering to a state code, you would have the choice of copying that state code into the city code and then having to maintain that as the state changed state code as time went by, or just referencing it back. So we would recommend referencing it back so that we wouldn't have the maintenance problem. This refers back to Minnesota State Code section 63. Blah blah blah.
And there was a lot of that. Why do we have this? Well, it's in state law. Well, where in state law? It was good. There was a lot of organizational, repetitive. I mean, it was. You could have done a task force just on that.
Yeah, I imagine.
Let alone just all the changes.
And then as state statutes change, that may or may not make the ordinance that you passed.
And I want to make one more comment on this and how big of a deal this was. I mean, you mentioned the work. The people who were on this and saw it through were not hoofing it. I mean, there were when I was the chair, I remember I would have a conference call with Troy and Ann Norris, the city manager. We'd do a email back and forth. We ended up separating certain kinds of suggestions from other kinds of suggestions, and it was a I would say I probably did 10 to 12 hours of prep for each 2-hour meeting that we did. So it was not get your packet on Friday, show up on Monday. That was not what this task force was all about. Right. It was very involved.
I think we had somewhere around 20 at the beginning, and it kind of winnowed down to maybe 10 or 12 diehards at the end.
Yeah, it was. So. It was. We did lose a few people through the process, but I think that was expected. I think sometimes you're going to have some people who kind of drop
and I believe that citizen involvement in this type of a project or on any of the task forces or commissions is ultra critical to having like an effective government, because when the citizens are deeply involved and they understand what's happening at the root level, the conversation is more driven by the residents as opposed to city staff or the bureaucrats, elected bureaucrats.
Yeah, and it's important to point out too. I pointed out this when you and I talked about it, Jay, that the city council never told us what to do or what we couldn't change, or never told us how to do it. It all happened pretty organically, and that's usually these task forces, and I'm usually not a fan of them because they're made up of half the people on them are council members or staff members, and they're steering it, and this was nothing like that whatsoever.
Yeah, Jeff Kolb was the city council member who was kind of the observer, and he sat in the side chairs and just made little notes, chuckled at some of the things we were talking about. But you're right, there was absolutely no steering. And Troy took his notes for what he needed to do to report back or cobble the code together, whatever we were saying, and everything was recorded. That's another thing in effective government about being transparent to the citizens and the residents, that this city council instituted a policy of recording every meeting, not just council meetings, and making it available on the website so that all the meetings are open and people can come to the meetings, but it's far more convenient using technology that you can go on and listen. And so our little task force meeting everyone was recorded and it was put out there on the web, and anybody who wanted to listen to what we were talking about was free to do so.
And they were great conversations, and having those work sessions recorded, listening to how they come up with something, because you don't get that if you just watch a council meeting, do you?
No.
Not at all.
No, there's a lot that happens in these task forces and commissions that you don't get from watching the council meeting. I'm all for this transparency. Again, it goes back to citizen involvement and citizens knowing what's going on in their government.
Absolutely. And I think, and this is just what I've noticed, that over the past 8 years, I mean, things were kind of tenuous in the community, and I think they felt that because there was a lack of transparency. And I feel like people have not only settled down, but like there is a sense of people being satisfied with maybe not every decision being made at City Hall, but at least that they have a voice before the votes, before the night of a vote, and that they have, their government communicating back to them in advance what's happening and giving them a voice earlier in the process. And it's been good.
Well, that's something newer in the last 4 years, that the council members are maintaining regular Facebook pages. So like after every council meeting, I see a post from, say, Nancy LaRoche, who is my Section 1 representative, of what the summary was that was covered in that meeting. For me, again, I'm all in favor of this transparency. Will be open with my email, phone. I'll have a Facebook page, just like a lot of the current council members do, and be proactive about posting things that are happening at council, and be available for questions or phone calls. As people have those questions to be answered.
Yeah, I think that some of the previous council members could have used like Windows 3.1, because there was, when I ran, this is 6 years ago, I didn't hear about it, didn't listen, tried to talk to the council, nobody got back to me, were some of the most common things that I heard. Probably every other person I talked to.
Yeah.
I went to the meeting, they just voted and didn't they listened, but they didn't, I didn't feel like I was, taken seriously or whatever were comments I heard a lot.
Yeah.
So hearing less of those is always positive.
Absolutely.
And I hope people feel that they can access their council member, rather than just keep things in. When I've been walking the neighborhoods, I remember one lady was saying that she thought there was people selling drugs on her street. And I said, it's your neighborhood. You cannot let that go by. If you see something, you have to say something. Maybe you're not going to call the cops directly, but, tell your council person, let the council person tell the police, and set up whatever kind of surveillance they need to see if that's actually happening or not. But you can't let your neighborhood fall into decay. That's your place. You live there, and you have to care about your neighbors. And you have to care about the strength of your neighborhood, which
is convenient. You bring that up because I was kind of thinking along the same lines.
That is the third thing that I kind of am focusing on, is the strength of neighborhoods. And so in that arena, I think that when Crystal is a place that people desire to live, that makes it a strong community. It means that property values will be strong. But in order to make it a desirable place, you have to keep the spending in check. We have to keep the taxes under control. We have to make sure that our infrastructure is maintained, the streets, the sewers, the water, the parks. We need to make sure that we have community building events like Night to Unite, or there's this organization called Light of Crystal. They do things like Pizza in the Park, and the Crystal Foundation for Community Development. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, Community Fund
Community
or something
Fund.
like that.
They sponsor a big plant sale in the spring. They have the Run for Rocco, I think is part of their thing. Crystal Frolics, another neighborhood building or community building thing. All of these things go towards people feeling a sense of belonging, wanting to live in Crystal, and just keeping the city strong. Business, economic development, making sure we don't have a lot of empty storefronts, and just encouraging that with economic development and so forth.
Now, you mentioned, it's interesting, too. I agree with what you said previously was so key. It's also up to residents to care about their own neighborhood.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Not just wait for government to come along and do something.
No, it actually
there's
has nothing to do with government.
Yeah, there's a private. Well, there's a private end to it. Government can do the things you were talking about, but ultimately, I know that when I lived in Crystal, it's something I have not seen in other cities, is sort of that sense of community. I'll live in cities. I've lived in cities to remain nameless, but there's it was different living in Crystal than somewhere else. I can't explain it.
But if the spending in the city is out of control and the taxes end up having to be higher because of that, people are not going to want to live there. The community becomes overpriced. The nice thing about Crystal is location, location, location. I mean, we have that going for us. And people want to live there not just because of location, because you're 7 minutes from downtown or 20 minutes from anywhere in the entire metro area, but the taxes are reasonable. The housing values are affordable. It's just a great community. And right now, I think the balance between all these things, the taxes, the spending, the community pride, I think it's all kind of hitting on all cylinders right now.
Yeah.
I want to help to keep that going.
Yeah, and you had talked about business, and I think a strong business community is a vital part of a city as well. I think Crystal is quite distinct in its approach, and I think it's kind of in a transitory period. You have places like New Hope that are building government buildings and luxury apartment buildings and not attracting a ton of business. But then you have like Robbinsdale on the other side, which has a small downtown. It has lots of local businesses. It is bringing in like a Hy-Vee where the old theater was. Crystal kind of is stuck in the middle. I mean, it does not have the same challenges as far as New Hope with we're just building government buildings and we're just building more rental units in a city that's already 51% rental. Crystal has the advantage of having a lot of homeowners, and that's good for a city, I think, as well. So as far as building this bigger, better, stronger business community, what do you envision, and what way do you think it's going to go?
Well, I think the Crystal Business Association is a pretty good organization. I mean, they're on top of that. As I drive around Crystal, I don't see a tremendous amount of empty storefronts. I know, in Golden Valley, at the Golden Valley Center, there are quite a few empty storefronts. I think that the landlord there has increased rents, and kind of, I don't know why you would do that, because you'd rather have something rather than empty storefronts. But I think where you can't allow your business properties to become blighted,
right?
And so they need to be maintained. And wherever I think one way that the city can, help business without, say, giving away the store, like we talked earlier about TIF financing,
right,
and basically giving away your tax base for a long period of time. I think the one way that the city can help is with things like permitting and zoning and that sort of thing, and not make it so difficult for a company that wants to locate in the city to do so. Back to the code and how complicated it was, or the regulations layered upon another. I think that keeping the code lean and to entice businesses, make it a little easier in the permitting process. That's the way that a city can help businesses to locate there and have a successful, robust business development environment.
Yeah, and that's something we've argued for a long time, is that if you're doing something to help the business community, you really need to make it available to everybody. Our neighbors to the west in New Hope love to use TIF. Our neighbors to the right in Robbinsdale, or to the east in Robbinsdale, love to play banker and give loans out to businesses to move and do other things. And I think that at any time that the government starts to interfere like that and pick winners and losers, you're not doing what's best for everybody.
The problem with that is that the cities are fighting for this development.
Right.
And so you've got a little bit of unfair competition when the city on the west is giving away the TIF and the city on the east is doing the loans. I mean, I look at cities like St. Louis Park and, what they created, Excelsior and Grand, or Maple Grove, what they created up in the big quarry area up there, and they continue to build more and more and more, and businesses want to locate there. And I don't know what the secret sauce is going on in Maple Grove. Do you guys know? Is it TIF? Is it loans? Or is it just that the business community is so strong and robust there that people want to be there?
Probably all of the above, if I had to guess, some mixture of all of them. But ultimately, I mean, there is a role for those things do exist for a reason. The abuse of them is where it gets. Only the big companies get all the breaks, and that's my problem with it. The mom and pop store, can fend for itself. But if a big store wants to come in, they expect something to be done to bring them there. So that's another kind of thing. Well, David, I want to ask you as we kind of start to wrap up here. I know you've been out pounding the pavement out in Ward 1. Banging on tons of doors. I've seen the Facebook updates. You're hitting record numbers every day.
I don't know.
I'm just curious what kind of feedback you've gotten from residents. What kind of, if there are any issues that they've raised to you? What kind of share a door knocking, experience or something you keep hearing over and over? What can you share that Ward 1 residents are telling you?
Well, like I said in the beginning, it took me a little while to get into the swing of things, being a newbie at this. But I mean, one of the most amazing things that I've noted is I have run into at least a couple dozen people who moved from one house in Crystal to another house in Crystal, or from either Robbinsdale, New Hope, or Golden Valley into Crystal. I'm sure it goes the other way as well. It just seems like once you're in this quadrant of the city, really in the first ring between, say, 100 and 169, once you're in there, you really like it and you'll come back. I've run into people who ended up growing up in Crystal, moving away for a period. Their parents were going to downsize their home, and they purchased their childhood home from their parents, and they're living there now. At least 2 or 3 houses I was at. That is a testament to how much people love Crystal, or at least this near northwest metro area. Another thing is that the people are just really nice. I mean, everybody loves the parks. I think that the Crystal parks are a jewel in the Crystal crown, and I want to keep it that way. I'm totally in favor of making sure that our parks are top notch. And I haven't read through the entire 20-year plan. I know, like, the Becker Park redevelopment is sort of first up here. I think that starts in 19, and
I think we're doing the Frolics at Welcome next year.
Yes, Crystal Frolics in 19 will be at Welcome Park, but back in 20. And I have seen the drawings for that, and it looks like it's going to be a great envisioning of that park. So a lot of nice neighbors, and it's been an educational experience, knocking on doors.
I bet.
That's everybody says that, including me. I would agree. It's an educational experience.
I wish more people were home.
Yeah, that too. So. I know. Well, now that maybe the nice, beautiful days are kind of sunsetting, maybe more people will be all cooped up.
They'll be out raking. They won't be able to go anywhere.
I've also learned that it's dangerous to door knock during the football game.
Oh yeah,
you don't know what you're going to get.
Especially when the Vikings are getting their arses kicked. Then you run
or when it's the last minute of a tied Packer-Viking game. Yeah, not a good time to knock on the door.
Wide right. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Did I say that?
So, yeah.
Well, David, why don't you run through one more time. Where do we find you on the web, on Facebook, Twitter, everywhere? Where do we?
I am everywhere.
Where can we get you?
I'm everywhere and nowhere at the same time.
Yeah, okay. Well,
as long as I'm here, it doesn't matter where here is. Yeah. www.sufferinforcrystal.com. David at sufferinforcrystal.com is my email. And I also have Facebook. You can just search for Suffering for Crystal on Facebook, and you'll find my page. I would really be honored to represent the people in Ward 1. I'm a kind of person who says it's kind of tough to complain about something if you're not willing to roll up your sleeves and work to make it better. I rolled up my sleeves on the task force, on the Code Review Task Force, and I'm ready to roll my sleeves up and give back work on the City Council.
That's good. So if people want a lawn sign, they want to volunteer, they want to help you hand out lit, that you need help with some of that stuff, right?
I sure do.
Okay.
As well as campaign donations. But on sufferinforcrystal.com, there's a volunteer tab. You can go on there and check that you'd like a lawn sign, and one will miraculously show up in your yard overnight, because that's when I have the time to do it. There's also a donate tab. So if you feel like you can support me financially, I would very much appreciate that.
The Suffering signs are out in force in Ward 1.
Yes, they are.
You've got quite a few out there.
But just because you see a lot doesn't mean that you shouldn't have one.
That's true.
So
it's kind of like me. If everybody's eating pizza, I have to have one too.
It's just like you think, my guys at the national level, at the state level have this wrapped up. I'm going to stay home and not vote. No, you need to go vote, because these people at the local level need your help.
Yeah, down the ballot should be the most important.
I saw a cartoon today. It had about 1/4 of the cartoon were people who had T-shirts that said "I voted," and the other 3/4 was a mass of people who with a bubble that said, "My vote doesn't count. I don't need to vote."
That's unfortunately too true. So, the people down the ballot really need your help on these races. And we've said this a billion times, too. And this is what I like about the campaign you're running, David. It's nonpartisan, the way that local politics is supposed to be. Unfortunately, there are too many people that are trying to run on a party ticket. I know that there's 3 of them specifically in Crystal that are running on a party ticket. We don't like that. I mean, what is the Republican or Democrat position on improving a park, or on speed limits, or these are local issues that need to be handled on a local basis by people who are not beholden to a party.
The issues just don't break down along the D to R lines. I mean, if you look at the Democratic or Republican platforms, you're not going to see anything, as you said, about maintaining the parks. Right. It's just not there. So
right. I mean, you break it down. There are some, when you look at bonding versus saving, when you look at how do we implement a local option sales tax for $10 million, or do we? You'd
be surprised some people who oppose that, though.
Yeah.
I mean, we did the whole story about Mike Opat voting against the wheelage tax.
Right.
So, I mean, there is pushback, but again, there's a duty that you citizens have also. David said it very well. You can't complain without being in the game and without educating yourself and making those connections and contacts. It's far easier to make a change in your ward than it is to your congressman.
Right.
Okay, so that just has to be the thinking. That's why it's one of the problems why we have everything so upside down in this country.
There are open seats and positions on Crystal commissions and task force right now, and you can find out that information at crystalmn.gov.
Great. We've preached that a million times.
And, it goes back to what I said earlier about citizen involvement, and 100% behind that.
And it's ridiculous. In a city of 22,000 people, if we got 40 spots there, they should never be open.
No.
They just should never be. All right. Well, David, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you very much.
Good luck to you coming up here. Voting absentee has already started. We should mention that if you do need that, you can get it through. You can mail it in.
Yeah.
If
Go
needed.
to City Hall, 8 to 4:30, Monday through Friday. No lines, no waiting. I found that to be very convenient.
Yeah.
I hate standing in line on Election Day.
But let me say this. Early voting can be a difficult thing. You need to do your homework. Go to David's website. Read all about what he stands for. Search out the opposition. You got to know where you stand, because once you vote, you can't take it back. And if you screw it up, that's that.
True that.
So don't vote until you're informed. But then, go vote. That's
absolutely
all right. Well, thank you so much, David. It's been a pleasure, and maybe we'll catch up with you after you win this thing. And
I would enjoy that.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, one thing is for sure. David Seffrin knows his stuff. The guy has done a number of hours of researching this stuff because he's got his facts down. What a great interview that was. And we got a bunch more interviews coming up as we get closer to Election Day. We want you guys to go in not only with knowledge of these candidates, if you're in those cities so you know better who to vote for, but in your city, just so that you are aware of the different issues that are going on. Because we've said it a billion times that these cities and counties and schools all copycat one another. And so if it's going on in City A, it's probably going on in City B, or it's coming down the pike. So it's important for you to understand and to hear exactly what's going on, and to understand these concepts and to know how to come at it so that when it does come up, you know how to fight it, or you know how to be a proponent of it if it's something that it is helpful for your community. So that's why we bring these people on. And especially, like with Crystal, we've got such a long history of change that has occurred over the last 8 years, where we had a very contentious council that was pushing for a lot of the same things that you would find in New Hope, that you would find in Robbinsdale, that you would find in Golden Valley, Brooklyn Park, Brooklyn Center, that now you have a city council that has taken the lead, and other cities are looking at Crystal and the things that they're implementing because they work. Because cities are figuring it out that, maybe we shouldn't be in a ton of debt. Maybe we should take a look at our regulations and our ordinances and try to come up with a more streamlined approach. Maybe we should be more transparent and let people in a little bit, but it's still not enough. It's not widespread enough yet, and we've got to make sure that these cities don't just look at it and consider it, but that we've got the right people in place to actually start implementing these things. So what can you do about it? Number one, obviously, is be informed and vote. That's great, but you know what? Number two is get involved, and it's so important for you to get involved and to be part of what we like to call Team 20K. We need 20,000 people across the state in these local elected and appointed positions that are willing to legislate or willing to advise these city councils, school boards, and county commissions on how to have a more common sense approach to government. Because right now you've got groups like the League of Minnesota Cities, like the Met Council, like the Minnesota Association of Development Organizations, that are giving their marching orders out to these cities, these townships, school districts, etc., and expecting them to fall in line. We need a new group of people that are willing to do things a little bit differently, that are willing to look outside of the box, that are willing to come up with some new solutions, because that is where we're going to see change happen. That is the important thing in all of this, that we don't just elect more people that are going to do the same thing, but that we sacrifice a little bit, that we're willing to do something about it and not just watch it happen around us. That is what is so important. And so please be a part of Team 20K. And if you don't know the first thing about running for office or whether you should, if you don't know how to get on an advisory commission, if you want help with a campaign you're currently running or you got an issue in your city, get a hold of us. COMMsolutionsMN@gmail.com. That's COMMsolutionsMN@gmail.com. And we will get in touch with you. We'll talk about your issue on the podcast. We'll blog, whatever. And if you love what you hear here on this podcast, please give it a rating. That's going to pump it up. It's going to make it more visible for people. It's going to make it so more people hear our message, because you need all the help that you can get. Minnesota has 853 cities, over 1,000 townships, 87 counties. How do we get the message out? And it's got to be by all of us doing the work together. We appreciate you guys so much, and we really want to help Minnesota change, because at the local level, most of the state is not governed the way that it believes. And that is because we have taken an approach that is more hands-off at the local level. So, with that said, on behalf of my partner, Andrew, and I think he had to escort our guest out of the building or something like that. But we're finishing up here, and we're going to come at you a week from now with another great podcast. We got more guests coming up, so please keep tuning in. Share this podcast so that other people can hear it. We thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts, and we love you, Minnesota. Now it's your turn to get to work.
Get too caught